Hello, and welcome to another edition of East of Ethnia. I want to introduce this week's topic first by noting that this week has been an interesting week, and it's been an interesting week because now, with over a year of more or less continuous protests by students in Serbia, you have the first effort by students to introduce a program, that is, to tell people what it is they will do if they're able to present their list in an election, if an election is actually held and if they take power. So, how they will address the basic problem that the protest was begun to address, which was the enormous risk at which the public is put because of systematic corruption and the rule of the state and of social space by informal networks that are not accountable. And what they came up with, what they proposed over the weekend at their meeting in Novi Sad, was first a law on lustration, and second, a law on documenting the provenance of property. That is, to attempt to assure that property that is held is legitimately held rather than being illegally expropriated either from proper owners or from the public. And the idea that has really attracted a lot of attention is the idea of lustration. So let's talk a bit about lustration. It's a bit of a strange word. I mean, the etymology sometimes even seems unclear. Is it about light fixtures or something like that? But fundamentally, the idea of lustration is that people who are connected to a formerly ruling criminal regime, or who have found to have participated in or who have failed to prevent criminal acts from taking place, are prevented, usually for a period of time, from holding public office or for running for public office. So it identifies a group of people as participating in criminal activity or criminal organizations, and it keeps them out of public service, out of public office. This is the general idea, and it's been tried in several places. It was tried in some places very briefly and haltingly and incompletely at the end of the Second World War. It was tried with fairly disastrous consequences after the invasion of Iraq by the United States in in the early 2000s. It was tried in a lot of states that had formerly been ruled by state socialist regimes, usually implemented pretty selectively and pretty incompletely. So lustration sounds like a nice idea. It sounds like a radical idea. Generally speaking, when it's put in place, not very much happens. It doesn't reach as wide a group of people as is intended when it's first proposed, and it stays in force for a relatively short time. So, what are some of the weaknesses here? Why does so little happen because of lustration? I mean, one of the things that we need to look at in order to understand this is the assumptions that have to be true in order for an effective lustration program to take place. So, the first assumption has to be that there is a genuine popular will to exclude some people who are considered to be guilty or complicit in guilt from holding power. Second, it probably has to be the case that this group of people to be excluded are not genuinely powerful enough that there is a risk for them to return and to undo all of the work of lustration. Third, there has to be a consensus not only that there's a group of people that needs to be excluded from holding public office and public positions, but also a consensus as to why they need to be excluded from public office. That is about what they did, about what is so bad about the regime that they represented. What is the thing that cannot possibly be repeated? That lustration is designed to prevent. And finally, there needs to be a capacity for the state to function without people who are experienced in the administration of state institutions, because the people who are experienced in the administration of state institutions and the people who are guilty of the kind of complicity that is implied by lustration are the same people. And generally speaking, this is why states coming after, governments coming in after a change of regime are in compromised positions because they have to work with bureaucracies and police forces that had previously been set to suppress them and to suppress citizens. If we take these assumptions together, the things that have to be true in order for illustration to work, we can see that they're weak assumptions. And they're weak assumptions, I think, even in some really dramatic cases, even in cases where a state is subject to international military occupation, as Japan and Germany were at the end of the Second World War, or even in cases where there appears to be, at least briefly, a genuine moment where there is will for revolutionary change, as arguably there may have been in Serbia after 2000. If we compare the situation now to the situation after 2000, the last time that there was a change of a criminal regime in Serbia, at that time you had a regime where the criminal acts in which they were regarded as having participated in included acts like genocide, like mass killing, like forced displacement, like large-scale sexual violence. So much more serious acts than corruption, which is the main objection to the regime presently, and which, by the way, is not something that is confined only to the ruling party. So some general things that we can say about proposals for illustration, as radical as the idea often sounds, it is weak. Lustration is not likely to do a lot of harm to anybody. And because of that, it's not likely to do a whole lot of good either. It is definitely not a magic wand to solve the problem of corruption, and not the kind of radical movement you would expect from a movement that has been actively involved in protest and subject to violence for more than a year. So in this context, there is something very interesting about Alexander Vučić's response to the proposal for illustration, because he regards it as an act of force. He regards it as a potentially illegal act, and he compares it to, these are the explicit comparisons that he's made. He compares it to what he calls the time of terror after the end of the Second World War in 1945. And he compares it to efforts to criminalize some criminal elements of the previous regime after the change of regime in 2000. And what's interesting about this is look at with whom Vučić is identifying himself. I mean, in the first instance, he's identifying himself with collaborators of the Nazis, who were the objects of repression in 1945. In the second instance, he's identifying himself with a regime that planned, carried out, assisted genocide and related crimes, of which he was in fact a part. So the first observation we can make is that even when he's faced with a weak proposal, Vučić identifies with the criminals. And the second thing is something very interesting, which is that Vučić seems to know by this act of identification what it is that's bad and objectionable about his regime, what it is that a democratic regime would be trying to prevent the return of. And in that sense, he is probably more conscious about the character of his regime and about the political dangers facing the country than most of the citizens, including citizens who oppose him. So that was our rant for today. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and we'll see you again in a week or so.